Hello, this is Kristen Dombrowski with your UDL Tidbit of the Week. This week's tidbit is all about how UDL is really a change in thinking, not a type of lesson plan. Often teachers want to see models and examples, but no matter how long you spend searching on Google or Teachers Pay Teachers or Pinterest, you're not very likely to find something called a UDL lesson. That's because it's not a type of lesson, but rather a change in thinking or the way you approach learning in your classroom. And that takes time to master. With this week's tidbit, I'll walk you through what that change in thinking might sound like. Traditionally, most of us have been trained to plan lessons around the what that we want students to learn. Backwards design has us identifying the what so that we know what we are teaching and assessing. And that works great for teachers, but not so great for students, and I'll show you why. First, let's talk through what starting with the what sounds like. We might approach a learning activity by identifying that we want students to learn how to take notes. That's our what. That's a great skill and standard, but it's not UDL friendly yet. Instead, with UDL, we actually start with the why. We should always be able to defend why we are teaching something, and we should always communicate that with students. When we include them in the why, we make them partners in their own learning. A significant amount of research supports that when students know the why, they are more engaged, they show more ownership, and they extend their learning and thinking beyond the lesson and beyond the classroom. So we need to ask ourselves, why are we teaching this lesson? And we need to let students know. So back to our example, we want students to know how to take notes. The way we communicate with that with them might sound like this. Hi students, today we're learning how to take notes as we read. This means that instead of just memorizing and underlining facts from our texts, our brains are going to do some work and actually think about what we're reading, like a conversation in our head. And when we have those thoughts, we're going to write them down, maybe on Post-its, and stick them in our reading. We do this because it helps our brain do more than just read, it helps us to think. And when we're all done reading, we'll have this great trail of thoughts that we can look over to help us really understand what we read, even when we forgot. So taking notes is really a great way to bump up our thinking power as we read, and we can use it with any text, not just for reading workshop. Next, it's just as essential that we plan out the how. How are we going to know that students are really getting it? And this is really key. We need to communicate this to our students so they know how they can show their learning. Here's what that might sound like. Okay, students, I'll know that your brain is working really hard thinking about the text when I see you taking notes. For me, that might look like Post-its I stick in my book, but for some of you, that might look different because we all have our strengths when taking notes. Some of you might use voice to text. Some of you might talk it out with a partner first. Some of you might even take notes on a graphic organizer or in your notebook. The way you take notes doesn't really matter. It's just important that we all do the same process. We think about the text and we record our thoughts in a way that works for us. I'll know you're getting this skill if I can see evidence of your notes, either on Post-its, in a notebook, on a computer, or some other way that works for you. All right, off you go. So then as the teacher, I'll need to make sure I have an idea of how I'll notice if a student is struggling or progressing over time, and how I plan to make a final assessment of this skill. Perhaps that might be at a later opportunity when they have to transfer this skill to another text or situation, and to do so independently. We can really earn some gold stars and make this a UDL lesson if we rope students in and ask them to set goals and parameters for themselves. Ask them to think about these questions and make some commitments. When the task becomes challenging or boring, or you get distracted by other tasks, what's your plan to stay on task? And you can model and have them develop a list of strategies for themselves to try that will really put them in the driver's seat of their own learning. The last part of this tidbit is to remember that every day is new and different. Take successes and challenges on a day-to-day basis and try not to get discouraged. UDL is a shift in thinking and it takes time and practice for both you and for your students. So good luck and have fun.